The church was deathly silent when Mr. Thomas Becket pulled me aside. His silver hair gleamed under the dim chandelier, his lips curving into a smirk that felt almost cruel in that moment. "Congratulations, Jessica," he said smoothly. "You've just unlocked your grandmother's will. Only the one who forgave her lies would inherit." For a second, I couldn't breathe. My hands trembled as the echoes of my fake eulogy still lingered in the air. I had just stood before an entire congregation, painting Margaret Whitmore, the cruelest woman I'd ever known, as a saint, describing virtues she had never once shown me. And now, somehow, my words had become the key to everything. St. Matthew's Episcopal Church was colder than the autumn wind rattling the stained glass windows. Everyone was there, but no one wanted to speak. We weren't grieving. We were waiting. Waiting for the awkward service to end, waiting to bury her cruelty with her body. My grandmother, Margaret Whitmore, had spent decades humiliating us. She cut my cousin Derek down with jokes about his weight, mocked Sarah until she abandoned art school, and used inheritance as a carrot, making my Uncle Robert and Aunt Margaret Ellis compete like children for her approval. And me? I had been the invisible one. Jessica Monroe, the granddaughter who never mattered, the teacher who wasn't ambitious enough for her taste. I sat in the third pew, sandwiched between my Aunt Margaret and cousin Derek. The church smelled of lilies and furniture polish, a scent I'd forever associate with false pretenses. The mahogany casket at the altar was draped with white roses, her favorite. Even in death, she had to have the most expensive arrangement. Reverend Wilson stood at the pulpit, his face betraying the awkwardness of the moment. "Margaret Whitmore was," he began, then paused, clearly struggling. He hadn't known her well. Nobody really did. "She was a pillar of our community," he continued weakly. "A generous donor to this church." That much was true. Her money had built the new education wing. Too bad she'd never stepped foot in it to see the children she claimed to support. "Now," Reverend Wilson cleared his throat, "is there anyone who would like to share memories of Margaret?" The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. I glanced around at my family. Uncle Robert stared at his shoes. Aunt Margaret examined her manicure. My cousins shifted uncomfortably. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The Reverend's discomfort grew palpable. Surely someone would like to say a few words. Another painful silence. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was pity for the Reverend. Maybe it was the absurdity of it all. A woman who had lived 78 years, leaving behind not one person willing to stand up and lie for her. Or maybe, deep down, I wanted to prove I was nothing like her. I rose to my feet. My Aunt Margaret's hand clutched my wrist. "Jessica, what are you doing?" she hissed. I gently freed myself and walked to the pulpit. The wood felt cool beneath my fingertips as I steadied myself. Looking out at the congregation, mostly business associates, a few distant relatives, the household staff, I saw surprise on their faces. Nobody expected the forgotten granddaughter to speak. "My grandmother," I began, my voice surprisingly steady, "was a complex woman. That wasn't a lie, at least. She taught me about strength, by showing me how to endure her criticism. She showed me the importance of independence, by never offering help when I needed it. She believed in excellence, and reminded us constantly of our failures. But as I continued, something strange happened. The words that came out of my mouth transformed into beautiful lies. I described a grandmother who baked cookies, who attended school plays, who offered wisdom during heartbreaks. I painted a portrait of a woman who had never existed. "When I was 12, I said, inventing wildly, I was struggling with math. Grandmother sat with me every Wednesday afternoon, patiently explaining fractions until it clicked. "Jessica," she told me, "the world rewards persistence, not perfection." I saw confusion in my cousins' eyes. They knew this was fiction. She taught me that true kindness isn't about grand gestures, but consistent presence. About showing up for the people you love, even when it's inconvenient. The irony was bitter on my tongue. Margaret Whitmore had never shown up for any of us. What I'll remember most, I concluded, is her belief in me when no one else did. Her quiet confidence that I would find my way. That's a gift I'll carry forever. By the time I finished, something had shifted in the room. Some of the staff were dabbing at their eyes. Even Uncle Robert looked moved, as if he wished the grandmother I described had been real. I returned to my seat, legs shaking. "That was beautiful," whispered a woman behind me. "You captured her perfectly." I just nodded, stomach churning with guilt and something else, a strange relief. For the first time, I had spoken about my grandmother without feeling the weight of her disapproval. After the service, as people filed out to their cars for the procession to Oakwood Cemetery, the family gathered in a small antechamber. The tension was thick. "What was that performance about?" Uncle Robert demanded, his face flushed. "Making the rest of us look bad?" "I was just trying to say something nice," I replied quietly. "Nice?" Aunt Margaret scoffed. "You made her sound like Mother Teresa. She was never nice to you, Jessica. To any of us." "I know," I admitted. "But what good would it have done to speak ill of her now?" "At least it would have been honest," Cousin Sarah muttered. I had no defense for that. I had lied, thoroughly and convincingly, about a woman who had made honesty her weapon of choice. Margaret Whitmore had always been brutally honest about our flaws, our failures, our disappointments, and I had repaid her with beautiful fiction. As we prepared to leave for the cemetery, Thomas Becket, her attorney, approached. He was tall and elegant in his expensive suit, silver hair perfectly combed. I'd only met him twice before. At family gatherings, Margaret had insisted on hosting despite making everyone miserable. "Miss Monroe," he said, addressing me with a formality that felt out of place. "A moment, please." He led me to a quiet corner of the church, away from my suspicious relatives. "That was quite a eulogy," he remarked, his eyes assessing me. "Thank you," I replied uncertainly. "No, thank you." A small smile played at his lips. "You've made my job considerably more interesting. I'll need you to come to my office tomorrow morning at 10. There are matters we need to discuss regarding your grandmother's estate." Before I could ask what he meant, he handed me his card and walked away, leaving me confused and slightly uneasy. What had I done? I didn't sleep that night. My one-bedroom apartment in Millfield felt especially small as I paced from living room to kitchen, replaying the day's events, the fake eulogy, the family's reactions, Beckett's cryptic invitation. What did he mean? About making his job more interesting? And why would I, of all people, need to discuss Margaret's estate? She'd made it clear that I wasn't part of her grand plans. "Teaching children for pennies," she'd once said, shaking her head at my career choice. Such a waste of potential. Morning came with rain, a soft, persistent drizzle that matched my mood. I dressed carefully in my best blazer and skirt, a navy blue set I usually saved for parent-teacher conferences. The outfit felt like armor as I drove to Becket, Hughes & Associates, a law firm housed in a stately brick building downtown. The receptionist led me through a maze of corridors to Beckett's office, all dark wood, leather-bound books, and the lingering scent of expensive cologne. He rose from behind his massive desk when I entered, gesturing for me to sit in one of the leather chairs facing him. "Miss Monroe, thank you for coming." His tone was formal, but I detected an undercurrent of something else. Amusement? Anticipation? "Mr. Becket." I folded my hands in my lap to stop them from fidgeting. "You said there were matters to discuss." "Indeed." He reached for a thick folder on his desk. "Regarding your grandmother's will." "I don't understand. I wasn't expecting to be mentioned in her will. And yet, here we are." He opened the folder with deliberate slowness. "Your grandmother was a strategic woman." That was one way to put it. "Before we proceed, I have something for you." He pulled out a cream-colored envelope with my name written on it in Margaret's elegant script. She instructed that this be given to you before the will is read. I took the envelope, my hands trembling slightly. It felt heavy, like it contained more than just paper. "I'll give you a moment," Becket said, rising. "There's coffee in the corner if you'd like." When the door closed behind him, I stared at the envelope. What final criticism had my grandmother saved for me? What parting shot had she crafted to remind me of my inadequacies? With a deep breath, I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of stationery, Margaret's personal letterhead embossed at the top. "My dear Jessica, if you are reading this, it means you have done what no one else in this family could. You chose kindness over truth. You offered me dignity in death that I perhaps never earned in life." I stopped, confused. Was this really from my grandmother? I have spent a lifetime creating tests for everyone around me. Tests of loyalty, of ambition, of integrity. Most have failed. You never played my game, which irritated and intrigued me in equal measure. I created one final test in death. Who would speak well of me, knowing they would gain nothing? Who would offer forgiveness, even if only in words? You don't know how much I needed that. I have not been kind, Jessica. I have not been the grandmother you deserved. I pushed people away because I feared being used for my money. I became the very thing I despised, someone who valued people only for what they could do for me. But you saw something in me worth salvaging even if you had to invent it. Your eulogy was fiction, but the compassion behind it was real. And for that, you have my gratitude and my estate. Use it better than I did. Margaret. I read the letter 3 times, tears blurring the words. This couldn't be real. This calculated posthumous manipulation couldn't be real. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts, and Beckett returned, settling back behind his desk. Have you finished? I nodded, unable to speak. Then let me explain the terms of your grandmother's will. He pulled out a legal document. Margaret Whitmore has left her entire estate, including the Whitmore Mansion on Elm Street, her investment portfolio valued at approximately $12 million, and various other properties and assets. To you, Jessica Monroe? The room seemed to tilt. What? There is one condition. Beckett's tone was matter-of-fact. You must deliver my eulogy at her funeral. A eulogy that speaks to her virtues, not her flaws. I stared at him. You knew about this? This test? He nodded. I helped her draft it last year, after her cancer diagnosis. She was quite specific about the terms. So yesterday when I spoke, you fulfilled the condition, yes? Quite impressively, I might add. Anger flared suddenly, hot and bright. This is cruel. Even for her, this is cruel. Perhaps? Beckett seemed unperturbed. Or perhaps it's her way of acknowledging what she valued most. Someone who could see beyond her flaws. I lied, I said flatly. Everything I said was a lie. Was it? He raised an eyebrow. Or did you simply choose to see what might have been, rather than what was? Margaret found that significant. I sat back, overwhelmed. $12 million. The mansion. All of it mine. Because I had stood up and told beautiful lies about a woman who had spent her life wielding brutal truths like weapons. What about the rest of the family? They received nominal bequests, $10,000 each. The household staff received generous severance packages. I could already imagine the fury, the accusations, the lawsuits. They'll contest it. They may try. Beckett smiled thinly. But your grandmother was very thorough. The will is ironclad. As I left his office an hour later, clutching a folder full of documents, I felt hollowed out. Not triumphant, not relieved, just empty. What kind of victory was this? What kind of inheritance? To receive everything from a woman who had given me nothing in life, simply because I had chosen, in one moment of weakness or compassion, to paint her as the grandmother she should have been. Rain still fell as I drove home, the city blurred through my tears. I wondered if Margaret was watching from somewhere, amused by her final manipulation, or if perhaps this was her twisted version of an apology. Either way, I now had everything she had valued most in life, and I wasn't sure I wanted any of it. The news spread like wildfire. By evening, my phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. I silenced it after the 3rd voicemail from Uncle Robert, his voice slurring with what I assumed was Scotch, alternating between pleading and threatening. I sat in my apartment's tiny kitchen, staring at my untouched microwave dinner. The folder from Beckett's office lay open beside me, filled with papers that made me the owner of more money than I could comprehend. Me, Jessica Monroe, 32 years old, 7th grade English teacher at Millfield Middle School, who had spent the last decade carefully budgeting for a modest retirement. The absurdity of it hit me in waves. One moment I'd laugh, and the next I'd feel sick with guilt and confusion. A sharp knock at my door startled me. I froze, considering ignoring it, but the knocking grew more insistent. Jessica, I know you're in there. It was Aunt Margaret's voice, tight with barely controlled anger. I sighed and went to the door, opening it just enough to see her standing in the hallway, her camel coat still wet from the rain. Behind her stood my cousins, Sarah and Derek. We need to talk, Aunt Margaret said, pushing past me into the apartment. I stepped back, letting them in. What choice did I have? So, Aunt Margaret said, her eyes darting around my modest living room with thinly veiled contempt. You've managed to fool everyone, haven't you? What are you talking about? I closed the door, mentally bracing myself. Don't play innocent. She whirled on me. All these years pretending you didn't care about her money, pretending you were above it all with your, she waved dismissively, teaching job and your principles. I didn't know about the will, I said quietly. Right, Derek snorted, dropping onto my couch without invitation. You just happened to give that nauseating eulogy out of the goodness of your heart. Actually, yes. I leaned against the wall, keeping some distance between us. I spoke because no one else would, because it seemed cruel to let her be buried without a single kind word. Kind? Sarah laughed bitterly. Nothing about her was kind, Jess. You know that better than anyone. She treated you like you were invisible. Maybe that was better than how she treated the rest of you, I said softly. A tense silence followed. We're contesting the will, Aunt Margaret finally announced. All of us. Robert's already spoken to a lawyer. I had expected this. That's your right. You don't seem concerned. I shrugged. Mr. Beckett says the will is solid. Beckett is a shark who was paid well to protect her interests. Aunt Margaret snapped. But even sharks can be defeated with the right strategy. What do you want from me, Aunt Margaret? I was suddenly tired. Did you come here to threaten me? To make me feel guilty? Or do you actually believe I orchestrated this whole thing? She studied me for a moment. What I want, she said carefully, is for you to do the right thing. And what's that? Share it. Split the estate equally among the family. It's what Margaret should have done in the first place. I almost laughed. When did she ever do what she should have done? This isn't about her anymore, Derek interjected. It's about you. What kind of person you're going to be. The implication was clear. Keep the money and become like Margaret. Selfish, isolated, manipulative. Share it and prove I was better than she was. I need time to think, I said finally. This has all happened so fast. Don't take too long, Aunt Margaret warned. The longer this drags on, the uglier it gets for everyone. After they left, I sat in the silence of my apartment, feeling the weight of Margaret's final manipulation. She hadn't just left me money, she'd left me a moral dilemma, a test of character that would define my relationship with my family forever. My phone buzzed with a text. It was from my friend Ellie, the only person I'd told about the inheritance. You okay? Need company? I texted back, please. 20 minutes later, Ellie arrived with a bottle of wine and takeout from our favorite Thai place. Unlike my relatives, she didn't push or pressure. We sat on my small balcony picking at pad thai and watching the rain. What are you going to do? She finally asked. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to donate it all just to be free of it. And the other part? I sighed. Thinks maybe this is an opportunity. To do something good. To prove that money doesn't have to poison everything it touches. Ellie swirled her wine thoughtfully. What would the students say? If they knew Ms. Monroe was secretly a millionaire? The thought made me smile. Jaden Miller would probably ask if I could buy him a PlayStation. And you probably would. Ellie laughed. She was right. That was exactly who I was. The teacher who brought extra lunches for kids who forgot theirs, who spent her own money on classroom supplies, who stayed late helping students who struggled. You know, Ellie said gently, taking the money doesn't make you like her. What matters is what you do with it. I nodded, looking out at the city lights blurred by rain. I just keep thinking about that letter. Was it genuine remorse or her final power play? Does it matter? Ellie asked. Either way, you're free to make your own choices now. That night, after Ellie left, I finally gathered the courage to visit Margaret's website, a private memorial page Beckett had mentioned where friends and associates had left condolences. Most were formal and impersonal, the kind of things people say when they respected someone's position, but not necessarily the person. But one comment caught my eye. Ms. Whitmore gave me a chance when no one else would. She was tough, sometimes brutally so, but she saw something in me worth investing in. I owe my career to her belief in me. David Chen, former CN, intern, Whitmore Enterprises. I stared at the screen. Who was this David Chen? His Margaret Whitmore sounded nothing like the woman I knew. Had there been sides to her I never saw? People she actually helped, encouraged, believed in? I fell asleep on the couch, the laptop still open, dreams filled with Margaret's voice asking questions I couldn't answer. The next morning I called in sick to school and drove to the Whitmore mansion on Elm Street. According to Beckett, it was mine now, along with everything in it. I needed to see it, to walk through those intimidating rooms that had always made me feel small and insignificant as a child. Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper, answered the door. Her expression was guarded, but not unfriendly. Miss Jessica, she said, stepping aside. Mr. Beckett said you might be coming. The house was exactly as I remembered. Grand, immaculate, and cold. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, artwork worth more than my annual salary. I walked through the foyer into the main sitting room, where Margaret had always received us for holiday gatherings, perched like a queen on her favorite chair, while we sat uncomfortably on antique furniture designed more for appearance than comfort. "Would you like some tea?" Mrs. Chen asked. "Yes, please." While she was gone, I wandered to the large bay window overlooking the garden. Rain still fell, transforming the manicured grounds into a glistening, otherworldly landscape. "She spent a lot of time looking out that window near the end," Mrs. Chen said, returning with a tea tray. "Did she?" I couldn't imagine Margaret being contemplative. Mrs. Chen nodded, pouring tea into delicate porcelain cups. "She changed, you know. After the diagnosis. Became quieter. Sometimes she would talk about regrets." "Regrets?" The concept seemed foreign, applied to my grandmother. "What kind of regrets?" "Family, mostly." Mrs. Chen handed me a cup. She kept a book in her study. "Perhaps you should see it." Curious, I followed Mrs. Chen to Margaret's study, a room I had rarely been allowed to enter as a child. Like everything else in the house, it was impeccably organized. Books lined the walls, a large desk dominated the center, and a small seating area by the window offered a view of the side garden. Mrs. Chen went to the desk and opened a drawer, removing a leather-bound book. "She worked on this every evening," she said, handing it to me. I thought, perhaps it might help you understand. When she left, closing the door softly behind her, I sat in Margaret's chair, the seat of power from which she had controlled her empire, and opened the book. It wasn't a diary as I had expected, but a scrapbook. And to my shock, it was filled with me. Newspaper clippings of the teaching award I'd won last year. A program from the middle school play I'd directed. Photos of me at family gatherings, often standing apart from the others. My college graduation announcement. Even my kindergarten report card. On one page was a photo of me at 16, sitting alone on the mansion's back porch during a family Thanksgiving. Beneath it, in Margaret's elegant handwriting, "Jessica reads while the others argue." Over inheritance. The only one who sees me as a person, not a bank account. My hands trembled. This couldn't be real. The grandmother who had barely acknowledged my existence had been secretly documenting my life. The woman who had never attended a single school event had kept the newspaper clipping about my teaching award. I turned page after page, finding more evidence of an attention I had never felt. Near the end, the entries became more personal. "Jessica visited today. No agenda, no requests for money. Just sat with me while I complained about the gardener. Why is she the only one who doesn't want something from me? Have I made it impossible for the others to love me without conditions?" The last entry, dated just weeks before her death, set the terms of the will today. "Beckett thinks I'm being manipulative. Perhaps I am. But I need to know if anyone in this family is capable of forgiveness. Even if it's just words. Even if it's a beautiful lie. I need to hear it before I go." I closed the book, tears streaming down my face. The rain outside had stopped, and weak sunlight filtered through the windows. Margaret Whitmore, the cruel matriarch who had terrorized our family, with her sharp tongue and arbitrary tests, had been collecting pieces of my life like precious artifacts. Had been watching me, wondering about me, perhaps even proud of me. It didn't erase the hurt, the years of feeling invisible, but it complicated everything I thought I knew about her, about us. I sat in her chair for a long time, thinking about forgiveness. Real forgiveness, not the kind I had performed at her funeral. Thinking about the inheritance that now felt less like a trap and more like a desperate final communication. The day of the reading of the will arrived with unseasonable sunshine. Beckett's conference room was tense as my relatives filed in, careful not to make eye contact with me. Uncle Robert looked haggard, like he hadn't slept. Aunt Margaret's lips were pressed into a thin line. My cousins, Sarah and Derek, sat side by side, united in their resentment. I had chosen a seat near the window, apart from them. The manila folder containing Margaret's scrapbook sat on my lap. I had brought it as a talisman, a reminder of the complicated woman whose final act was causing such turmoil. Mr. Beckett entered precisely at 10 o'clock, accompanied by his assistant who carried several folders. He nodded to each of us, his professional demeanor betraying nothing of what was to come. "Thank you all for coming," he began, seating himself at the head of the conference table. "As you know, we're here for the formal reading of Margaret Whitmore's last will and testament." The ritual that followed was familiar from movies and TV shows, the formal language, the listing of assets, the small bequests to longtime staff, $10,000 to Mrs. Chen, the same to the gardener, the driver, the cook. Then came the part everyone was waiting for. To my family members, Robert Whitmore, Margaret Ellis, Derek Ellis, Sarah Ellis, I leave the sum of $10,000 each, with my sincere hope that they find happiness beyond material wealth. Uncle Robert's face flushed dark red. Aunt Margaret clutched her designer handbag so tightly her knuckles went white. Derek muttered something under his breath that I was glad I couldn't hear clearly. The remainder of my estate, including all properties, investments, and personal effects, I leave to my granddaughter Jessica Monroe, with no restrictions save one, that she delivered a eulogy at my funeral speaking to my better nature rather than my failings. Beckett paused, looking directly at me. This condition has been met. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, predictably, the explosion came. This is preposterous. Uncle Robert slammed his fist on the table. She manipulated a sick old woman. This will is a travesty. We're contesting it, Aunt Margaret announced coldly. All of us. You're welcome to try, Beckett replied with the calm confidence of someone who knew he held all the cards. But I should inform you that Margaret anticipated this reaction. The will includes a no-contest clause. Anyone who legally challenges it forfeits even the modest bequest they received. That's coercion, Derek argued. That's a state law, Beckett corrected. As the arguments escalated, I sat quietly, watching the family drama unfold like I was observing it from a great distance. These people, my family by blood, had never really been my family in any way that mattered. Margaret had kept us all at arm's length, pitting us against each other in her endless tests, and now her final test was tearing apart whatever fragile connections remained. Jessica, Aunt Margaret's sharp voice cut through my thoughts. Are you going to sit there and say nothing? Do you have any idea what you're doing to this family? All eyes turned to me. For once, I was not invisible. I didn't ask for this, I said quietly. I didn't know about the will when I spoke at the funeral. So you claim, Uncle Robert scoffed. I met his gaze steadily. It's the truth, but even if I had known, I probably would have said the same things. Why? Sarah demanded. She was awful to you. Yes, I agreed. She was often cruel, dismissive, cold. I took a breath. But I've learned something in the last few days. People are complicated. Even Margaret. I opened the folder on my lap and placed the scrapbook on the table. She kept this. A record of my life. Things I never thought she noticed or cared about. Pushed it toward the center of the table. She was watching. In her way, she just didn't know how to connect. Uncle Robert glanced at the scrapbook with suspicion. What's your point? My point is, I'm not keeping all of this. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. I've made a decision, I continued. I'm establishing a foundation in Margaret's name. Half of the estate will go to fund educational initiatives for underprivileged students, college scholarships, school supplies, support for teachers. And the other half, Aunt Margaret asked, suddenly alert, will be divided among the family, I said, equally. The silence that followed was different, stunned rather than hostile. Why would you do that? Derek finally asked. After how we've treated you. I smiled faintly. Because I don't want to be defined by Margaret's games anymore. Any of us. The foundation, Beckett interjected, is an excellent idea. I can have the paperwork drawn up immediately. Thank you, I nodded. I'd like to move forward as quickly as possible. As the meeting concluded, my relatives filed out with mixed expressions. Relief, confusion, lingering resentment. None of them thanked me. I hadn't expected them to. This wasn't about gratitude, it was about breaking the cycle Margaret had created. Uncle Robert was the last to leave. He paused at the door, looking back at me with something like grudging respect. She picked the right one, he said gruffly. Much as I hate to admit it. After everyone left, I remained seated, feeling lighter than I had in days. Beckett regarded me, thoughtfully. You do realize, he said, that this is precisely what Margaret hoped would happen. What do you mean? He smiled slightly. She knew you wouldn't keep it all. That was never the test. Then what was? To see if anyone in this family had learned what she never could, that wealth is a tool, not an identity. That relationships matter more than money. He gathered his papers. She chose well. As I drove away from the law office, I felt Margaret's presence beside me. Not the critical, demanding grandmother I had feared, but the complicated, flawed woman who had watched me from a distance, collecting pieces of my life she couldn't bring herself to be part of. "I forgive you," I whispered to the empty passenger seat. This time the words weren't a performance. They were real, not because she deserved forgiveness, but because I deserved freedom from the weight of resentment. Back at my apartment, I opened my laptop and began a list of ideas for the Margaret Whitmore Educational Foundation. Scholarships for students from low-income backgrounds, grants for innovative teaching methods, support for arts education. Sarah would appreciate that, given how Margaret had discouraged her artistic talents. My phone rang. It was the principal of my school. "Jessica," he said when I answered. "Just checking in. Are you feeling better?" I looked around my small apartment, thinking of the mansion I now owned, the foundation I would build, the complicated legacy I had inherited. "Yes," I said, realizing it was true. "I am." A week after the reading of the will, I stood on the wide porch of the Whitmore mansion, key in hand. The spring sun warmed my face as I gathered the courage to enter, not as a visitor this time, but as the owner. The thought still felt surreal. I had been living in my apartment, going to work, grading papers, as if nothing had changed, as if I weren't now worth millions, as if I hadn't upended my family's expectations with one decision. The door swung open before I could use my key. Mrs. Chen stood there, a gentle smile on her face. "Miss Jessica, we've been expecting you." We, the staff, Mrs. Chen, the gardener, Mr. Reyes, the cook, Mrs. Patel. They were all part of my inheritance, too. People whose livelihoods depended on me now. "I'm sorry I haven't been by sooner," I said, stepping into the foyer. The marble floor gleamed in the sunlight, streaming through the high windows. "You needed time," Mrs. Chen said simply. "Tea in the conservatory?" I nodded, following her through the house. Each room we passed stirred memories, mostly of sitting stiffly, being seen but not heard, enduring Margaret's critical gaze. But now, seeing the house through adult eyes, I noticed things I had missed as a child. The exquisite craftsmanship of the crown molding, the strategic placement of windows to capture light, the careful curation of art, not just expensive pieces, but works with meaning, with story. The conservatory at the back of the house had always been my favorite space. Glass walls and ceiling, filled with plants and wicker furniture, it felt less formal than the rest of the mansion, more alive. Mrs. Chen brought tea on a silver tray, setting it on the table between two comfortable chairs. "Will you be moving in soon?" she asked, pouring tea into delicate cups. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "It's so much house for one person." Your grandmother felt the same way toward the end. Mrs. Chen handed me a cup. She stayed mostly in the East Wing, said the rest was just for show. "For show," I repeated thoughtfully. "That sounds like her." Mrs. Chen's expression softened. She wasn't always as you knew her. When I first came to work here 30 years ago, she was different, more alive. What changed her? Mrs. Chen considered this as she stirred her tea. Loss, perhaps. Your grandfather's death, your father's estrangement, disappointments that hardened her. I sipped my tea, thinking about the scrapbook, about the woman who had created it. Did she ever talk about me? More than you'd think. Mrs. Chen smiled slightly. She was proud of you, in her way. Proud that you chose your own path. She never said that to me. No, Mrs. Chen acknowledged. She wasn't good at saying the important things aloud. After tea, I wandered through the house alone. Each room told a story of wealth, of taste, of a life, carefully constructed for maximum impression. But it was the small study at the back of the second floor that drew me in. Unlike the grand rooms downstairs, this space felt personal. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled not with leather-bound classics for display, but with well-worn volumes that had clearly been read. A comfortable chair by the window, a desk with a view of the garden. On the desk sat a framed photograph I had never seen before. It showed a much younger Margaret, maybe in her 30s, laughing with a man I recognized as my grandfather from other photos. They were on a boat, wind tousling their hair, looking carefree in a way I had never associated with my grandmother. I picked up the photo, studying the woman in it. Where had that person gone? What had turned her into the cold, critical matriarch I had known? That was their anniversary trip, a voice said from the doorway. I turned to see Mr. Reyes, the gardener. 30 years married. They went sailing in Maine. You knew them then? I asked. He nodded. I started working here right after they returned from that trip. They were happy, until Mr. Whitmore's heart attacked the following year. I set the photo down, carefully. Do you think she ever recovered from losing him? Mr. Reyes shook his head. Some people don't know how to live with grief, Miss Jessica. They let it change them. Over the next few hours, I explored every room of the mansion, seeing it with new eyes. Not just as a symbol of Margaret's wealth and power, but as the home of a woman who had loved and lost, who had hardened against pain, who had watched her family from a distance, unable to bridge the gaps she herself had created. In the master bedroom, I found her jewelry box, filled with pieces worth more than my annual salary. In the library, first editions signed by authors I had studied in college. In the basement, a wine cellar with bottles dating back decades. It was overwhelming, not just the monetary value, but the weight of history, of legacy. By late afternoon, I found myself back in the conservatory, watching the sun cast long shadows through the plants. Mrs. Chen appeared with a folder. "Mr. Beckett dropped this off for you," she said. "The paperwork for the foundation." I took the folder, flipping through the legal documents that would establish the Margaret Whitmore Educational Foundation. Beckett had moved quickly, efficiently. "Have you decided what to do with the house?" Mrs. Chen asked. I looked around at the beautiful space, thinking of all the rooms sitting empty upstairs. "It's too big for me," I said finally. "But I was thinking, it could be part of the foundation." "How so?" "A center for education," I said, warming to the idea as I spoke. "We could host workshops for teachers, summer programs for students who can't afford camps, lectures, reading groups, community events." Mrs. Chen smiled. "She would have hated that." I laughed. Yes, she would have. All those children running around her precious antiques. "And yet," Mrs. Chen said thoughtfully, "I think part of her would have approved, using wealth for something meaningful. She always said money sitting idle was money. Wasted." That evening, as I prepared to leave, I stood in the foyer looking up at the grand staircase. For the first time, the mansion didn't feel intimidating. It felt possible. A space that could be transformed, just as Margaret's legacy could be transformed. "Will you be back tomorrow?" Mrs. Chen asked as she handed me my jacket. "Yes," I said, surprising myself with the certainty. "There's a lot of work to do." The next day, I called in a personal day at school and returned to the mansion with a notebook and a plan. I walked through each room, making notes about what could stay, what could be repurposed, what would need to change for a house of judgment to become a house of learning. Mrs. Patel, the cook, found me in the dining room around lunchtime, measuring the massive table that could seat 20. "This would be perfect for group projects," I murmured, imagining children spread out with art supplies and books. "You're really going to do it," Mrs. Patel said. "Turn this mausoleum into a school." I looked up, startled by her bluntness. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "That was inappropriate." "No," I smiled. "It's accurate. This place has been a mausoleum, but it doesn't have to stay that way." Mrs. Patel considered me for a moment. "You know, she changed her will after you visited last Christmas." "I didn't visit last Christmas," I said, confused. "I was in Colorado with friends." "No, you came by, just for an hour, brought her a book. She pretended not to care, but she read it cover to cover that night." The memory came back to me, a brief, awkward visit. I brought Margaret a novel I thought she might enjoy, though I'd had no evidence she read fiction. She had accepted it with a curt thank you, and we'd sat in uncomfortable silence until I made an excuse to leave. "I didn't think she even opened it," I admitted. "She didn't let people see what mattered to her," Mrs. Patel said. "But things mattered all the same." That afternoon, Beckett called to confirm the foundation paperwork was proceeding smoothly. "The family seems to have accepted your decision," he reported. "No challenges to the will so far." "That's a relief. And the division of assets? Have you decided how to handle that?" "Yes," I said, looking out at the garden where Mr. Reyes was pruning roses. "I want to be fair, but I also want to be thoughtful. This isn't just about money." "I agree," Beckett said. "Margaret would approve of your approach." "Would she?" "Sometimes I think she'd be horrified by what I'm doing." "Perhaps both," he acknowledged. She was a woman of contradictions. After hanging up, I continued my tour of the house, ending up in Margaret's bedroom. I had been avoiding it, feeling like an intruder in her most private space. But now I made myself look at the room where she had spent her final days. It was less grand than I had expected. The furniture was elegant but not ostentatious. The bed was large but not imposing. On the nightstand lay a book, the novel I had given her at Christmas. A bookmark peeked out near the end. She had almost finished it. Beside the book was a small silver frame holding a photo I recognized from the scrapbook, me at my college graduation, grinning widely in my cap and gown. I hadn't known she had a copy of that photo, let alone that she kept it by her bed. I sat on the edge of the mattress, holding the frame, thinking about the woman who had placed it there, who had read my book, who had watched my life from a distance she couldn't or wouldn't cross. "Why didn't you just talk to me?" I whispered to the empty room. Why all the games, the tests, the judgments? The silence offered no answers, but as I looked around the room, at the book, the photo, the view of the garden she had cultivated for decades, I felt a strange peace settle over me. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. Margaret Whitmore had been complicated, flawed, often cruel, but she had also been human, had loved in her broken way, had regretted at the end, and now her legacy was mine to reshape. Summer arrived with unusual heat, shimmering over the renovated mansion. In just 2 months, the Margaret Whitmore Educational Center had transformed from idea to reality. I stood in what had once been the formal dining room, watching volunteers set up tables for the first teacher workshop. The grand, chandelier still hung overhead, but the stuffy curtains had been replaced with light, flowing fabrics that let in the morning sunshine. The imposing family portraits had given way to student artwork. Vibrant, imperfect, alive. "Ms. Monroe?" A young woman approached, clipboard in hand. "The caterers are asking where to set up lunch." "The conservatory," I replied. "It's cooler there and we can use, the patio if people want to eat outside." I still taught at Millfield Middle School, refusing to give up the job I loved despite my changed circumstances. But summer break allowed me to focus fully on launching the foundation. We had renovated the mansion's east wing into administrative offices, while the main floor had been repurposed for educational programming. Only a few rooms remained as they had been, preserved as a reminder of the house's history. By 10 o'clock, the mansion was filled with teachers from across the district, many from underfunded schools in neighboring communities. The Foundation's first initiative was a professional development series, offering stipends and resources to educators who rarely received either. "This is amazing," said Ellie, who had joined the Foundation's board while maintaining her own teaching position. "I still can't believe this is the same house you used to dread visiting." "Neither can I admitted, watching the animated conversations unfolding in what had once been the most uncomfortable room in my life. The morning session went smoothly. Workshops on innovative teaching methods, breakout groups discussing challenges in urban education, a keynote speech from a renowned educator. Through it all, I moved among the participants, feeling a growing sense of rightness. This was what the mansion was meant to be. Not a fortress of wealth and judgment, but a space for growth, for possibility. During lunch, I slipped away to the small study on the second floor, the one room I had claimed as my own, leaving it mostly as Margaret had kept it. The worn books, the comfortable chair, the view of the garden. I needed a moment of quiet before the afternoon sessions. A knock at the door interrupted my solitude. I turned to see Sarah, my cousin, Margaret's granddaughter like me, though we had never been close. "Your assistant said I might find you here," she said, hovering in the doorway. "Come in," I offered, gesturing to the chair opposite mine. "How are you?" Sarah had changed in the months since the will reading. The bitter anger had faded from her expression, replaced by something more contemplative. She had used her portion of the inheritance to open a small art gallery downtown, fulfilling the dream Margaret had once mocked. "I'm good," she said, settling into the chair. "The gallery's doing well. We just sold 3 major pieces." "That's wonderful." "I came to see the center," she continued. "Aunt Margaret mentioned what you were doing here. I was curious." I smiled at the irony. My aunt, who had been so furious about the will, now apparently discussing the foundation without venom. "What do you think?" I asked. Sarah looked out the window, considering. "It's not what I expected. I thought you'd sell this place, honestly. Too many bad memories." "I considered it," I admitted, "but then it felt like running away." "From what?" "From her legacy. From the chance to turn it into something better." Sarah nodded slowly. "I went through something similar with the gallery. At first, I just wanted to prove her wrong, show that art wasn't a waste of time like she always said. But lately, it feels less about her and more about what I actually want to create." "That's how healing works, I think," I said. "At first, you're still reacting to the hurt. Then one day, you realize you're building something new for its own sake." We sat in companionable silence for a moment. Perhaps the first truly comfortable moment we had ever shared. "I've been meaning to ask you something," Sarah said finally. "That scrapbook, the one you showed us at the will reading, did she really keep all that stuff about you?" "Yes," I said. It surprised me too. "Did she have one about the rest of us?" The question held vulnerability I had never heard in Sarah's voice before. I hesitated, not wanting to hurt her. "No," I said gently. "Just the one." Sarah nodded, absorbing this. I used to wonder why she was so hard on me, especially about the art. Now I think maybe she was afraid for me, afraid I'd end up struggling, not making a living. "Maybe," I agreed, though that doesn't excuse how she expressed it. "No," Sarah smiled wryly. "Nothing excuses that. But understanding helps, a little." After Sarah left to tour the rest of the center, I remained in the study, thinking about how the ripples of Margaret's life and death continued to spread through our family. Derek had used his inheritance to go back to school, pursuing the degree his grandmother had always dismissed as impractical. Uncle Robert had, surprisingly, volunteered his business expertise to the foundation's board. Even Aunt Margaret had begun to thaw, sending a large floral arrangement for the center's opening. We weren't healing as a family, exactly. Too much damage had been done for that. But we were healing as individuals, each finding our way forward with the complicated gift Margaret had left us. The afternoon session of the workshop focused on equity in education, how to ensure that all students, regardless of background, received the support they needed. As I listened to the passionate discussions, I thought about Margaret's own twisted version of equity, her belief that hardship built character, that struggle was necessary for growth. There had been some truth in her philosophy, buried beneath the cruelty of her methods. Education wasn't always about making things easy. Sometimes it was about providing the right kind of challenge, the supportive struggle that built confidence rather than destroying it. After the workshop ended and the last participants departed, I walked through the quiet mansion. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The house felt different now, less imposing, more alive. Mrs. Chen found me in the former ballroom, now set up as a multi-purpose space with movable furniture and technology stations. "A successful day," she observed. "I think so," I agreed. Though Margaret would probably be horrified to see her precious antiques pushed against the walls to make room for whiteboards. Mrs. Chen smiled. Perhaps. Or perhaps not. She appreciated utility in her way, things serving their proper purpose. And what was the proper purpose of this house, do you think? To impress? To intimidate? To last? Mrs. Chen I said simply. To create something that would outlive her. Is that not what you're doing now in your own way? The question stayed with me that evening as I drove back to my apartment. I had kept my modest home despite my newfound wealth, finding comfort in its familiar walls while the mansion transformed into something new. Was I still operating within Margaret's framework? Still seeking, as she had, to create a legacy that would outlast me? Or had I truly broken free of her influence, forging my own path? Perhaps both were true. Perhaps that was the nature of inheritance. Not just money or property, but values, habits, ways of seeing the world. The challenge wasn't to reject everything, but to sift through carefully, keeping what was valuable and discarding what was harmful. As summer progressed, the educational center flourished. We hosted reading programs for children from low-income neighborhoods, leadership retreats for high school students, research fellowships for educators developing innovative curricula. The mansion that had once stood as a monument to one woman's wealth now served hundreds of people seeking knowledge, connection, growth. Margaret's name remained on the foundation on the building, but its meaning had changed. No longer simply the identifier of a powerful, feared woman, but the banner under which new possibilities were emerging. One evening in late August, as I was leaving the center after a long day of planning for the fall programs, Mr. Reyes stopped me in the garden. "I have something to show you," he said, leading me to a section of the garden I had rarely visited, a small secluded area enclosed by hedges. In the center stood a rose bush I had never seen before, bearing flowers of a unique coral pink hue. "It's beautiful," I said, leaning in to smell the fragrant blooms. "It's new," Mr. Reyes explained. "A hybrid I've been developing. I've decided to name it Jessica's Redemption." I looked at him, surprised. "For what you've done here," he continued, "taking something thorny and making it beautiful." I touched one of the blossoms gently, moved by the gesture. "Thank you, but I don't know if redemption is the right word." "No?" Mr. Reyes raised an eyebrow. What would you call it then? I considered the question, looking around at the garden, at the mansion beyond, at all that had changed and all that remained the same. Transformation, I said finally. Not erasing what came before, but growing something new from it. Mr. Reyes nodded, satisfied. Then, Jessica's transformation, it will be. As I drove home that night, I thought about names, about legacies, about the stories we tell of those who came before us. Margaret's story had been rewritten, not falsified as in my eulogy, but expanded, complicated, humanized. And in that rewriting, I had found my own story changing too. Fall painted the trees surrounding the Whitmore mansion in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. As October drew to a close, I found myself in Margaret's study, now my study, reviewing grant applications for the Foundation's Teacher Scholarship Program. The center had been operating successfully for several months, becoming a vibrant hub for educational innovation. A knock at the door interrupted my concentration. Mrs. Chen entered, holding a cream-colored envelope. Miss Jessica, I found this while clearing out the last of your grandmother's personal items from the attic storage. She handed me the envelope. My name was written on it in Margaret's unmistakable handwriting, followed by instructions, to be delivered. 1 year after my death. My heart quickened. When did you find this? Just this morning. I came across a small locked box I hadn't seen before. This was inside. I turned the envelope over in my hands. The seal was unbroken. Thank you, I said, and Mrs. Chen nodded, understanding my need for privacy with this unexpected message from the past. After she left, I sat for a long time staring at the envelope. What more could Margaret possibly have to say? Hadn't her will, her scrapbook, her final manipulation been message enough? Finally, I broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. Jessica, if you're reading this, a year has passed since my death, and you have inherited everything I valued. I wonder what you've done with it. I wonder who you've become. There is something I never told you, something I never told anyone. It's time you knew the truth about your father, my son, and why he left when you were 10 years old. I froze, my breath catching. My father had always been a painful absence, a wound neither my mother nor Margaret would discuss fully. All I knew was that he had abandoned us, disappearing from my life with barely an explanation. John didn't leave willingly. I forced him out. He came to me in financial trouble, a failed business venture, substantial debt. He asked for my help, not for himself, but for you and your mother. I could have easily provided it. Instead, I gave him an ultimatum. Leave the country and start fresh abroad with seed money from me, or stay and watch his family lose everything. I told him it was for his own good, that he needed to stand on his own feet, away from his family's crutch. The truth was more selfish. I couldn't bear to see my son as a failure. I couldn't tolerate the mess he'd made. I was protecting the Whitmore name, not him. He fought me at first, but when I threatened to cut all of you off completely, he conceded. The agreement was that he would never contact you or your mother again. In return, I would ensure you both were provided for. Modestly, as I didn't want to encourage dependence. Your mother never knew the full truth. She believed John had chosen to abandon you both. Her resentment protected you from hoping for his return. My hands trembled as I read, tears blurring the elegant script. All these years, I had carried the weight of abandonment, the quiet certainty that I hadn't been worth staying for. And all along, it had been Margaret's manipulation, her ruthless idea of what was best. I've had 2 decades to regret this decision, to watch you grow up without a father who loved you deeply, to see how the abandonment shaped you, made you independent, yes, but also wary, always keeping people at a distance. John died 5 years ago in Australia. Cancer. He wrote to me near the end, asking if he could contact you. I refused, telling myself it would only disrupt your life to suddenly have a dying father reappear. The enclosed key opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank, box number 247. Inside, you'll find all of John's letters. He wrote to you every month for years, sending them to me instead since he couldn't send them directly. I kept them, telling myself I might give them to you. Someday when the time was right. The time was never right. My pride never allowed it. I stopped reading, overwhelmed by grief and rage. Letters. Years of letters from my father that Margaret had hidden away, denying me the connection I had longed for throughout my childhood. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. With shaking hands, I continued. There is no justification for what I did. At the time, I believed I was doing what was necessary, what a strong matriarch should do to protect her family's dignity. I have since come to see it as my greatest failure. This confession isn't meant to earn your forgiveness. Some actions don't deserve to be forgiven. But you deserve the truth and the chance to know who your father really was through his own words. He loved you, Jessica. That was never a lie. Margaret, I sat motionless as the autumn light faded from the windows, the letter limp in my hands. The wound of my father's abandonment, long scarred over, was suddenly fresh and raw again. But beneath the pain of what Margaret had done was a strange, bittersweet comfort. My father hadn't chosen to leave me. He had loved me, had written to me for years. The next morning, I went to First National Bank. The process of accessing the safety deposit box was surreal, presenting ID, signing forms, following the bank officer into the vault, all while feeling as if I were moving through a dream. Box number 247 contained a bundle of letters, neatly tied with string, dozens of them, spanning years. On top lay a small photo album. I took everything back to the mansion, to the privacy of the study. There, I untied the string with trembling fingers and opened the first envelope, dated just weeks after my father had disappeared from my life. My dearest Jessica, I don't know if you'll ever read these words. I pray that someday you will. I want you to know that leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done, and not a day passes that I don't think of you. I read for hours, letter after letter, glimpsing the life of the father I had lost. His struggles establishing himself in Australia. His new business ventures, some successful, some not. His remarriage, though he wrote that no one could replace the family he had left behind. His pride when he read about my academic achievements in the school newsletter Margaret occasionally sent him. The last letter was dated just weeks before his death. Jessica, the doctors say I don't have much time left. My final wish is to see you, to explain everything face to face. Your grandmother refuses. Perhaps she's right. Perhaps it would be selfish to disrupt your life now, to ask for forgiveness I haven't earned. Know that I have loved you every day, that leaving you was my life's greatest regret, that I hope you've become the strong, compassionate woman I always believed you would be. With eternal love, Dad. The photo album contained pictures I had never seen. My father in Australia, standing in front of his shop, hiking in the outback, celebrating holidays with people I didn't recognize. In every image, he looked a little older, a little more weathered, but his smile remained the same one I remembered from childhood. That evening, I sat in the garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in the same colors as the autumn leaves. Mr. Reyes found me there, silently offering a cup of tea before sitting beside me on the bench. You seem troubled, Miss Jessica. I hesitated, then told him about the letter, the safety deposit box, the truth about my father. He listened without interruption, his weathered face compassionate. All these months, I said when I finished, I've been working to transform Margaret's legacy, to find the good in what she left behind. And now this. How do I reconcile this cruelty with everything else? Mr. Reyes was silent for a long moment, looking out at the garden he had tended for decades. When I prune roses, he finally said, I must cut away both the dead wood and the living growth. That's heading in the wrong direction. Only then can the plant become what it's meant to be. So I should just cut this part away, forget what she did? No, he said firmly. Remember it, understand it as part of who she was, but don't let it overtake the garden you're growing from what she left behind. I considered his words, watching a fallen leaf dance across the path. I'm not sure I can forgive this. Perhaps you don't need to, he suggested. Perhaps you only need to decide what to do with the truth. The truth. After so many lies, half-truths, and manipulations, the stark reality of what Margaret had done to my father, to me, was both painful and clarifying. That night, I made a decision. The foundation would continue its work. The good being done in Margaret's name would not be undone by the revelation of her cruelty. But I would add a new initiative, the John Monroe Reconnection Program, providing support for families separated by circumstance, helping them rebuild relationships thought lost. It wouldn't undo the past. My father was gone forever, our relationship irretrievable, but perhaps other families could be spared that pain. And as for Margaret, I would neither sanctify nor demonize her memory. She had been complex, capable of both calculated cruelty and genuine regret. The scrapbook and the hidden letters represented both sides of her nature, the woman who had valued me from afar even while making choices that wounded me deeply. In her final letter, she hadn't asked for forgiveness. Perhaps she had known it would be too much to expect, but she had, at last, offered honesty. A flawed gift, but the truest one she had to give. 1 year to the day after I discovered the truth about my father, I stood at the podium in what had once been the Whitmore Mansion's grand foyer, now converted into an elegant reception area for the educational center. Before me gathered the foundation's staff, board members, students from our programs, teachers who had received our grants, and, surprisingly, most of my family. Welcome to the first annual celebration of the Margaret Whitmore Educational Foundation, I began, looking out at the diverse faces watching me expectantly. Today marks not only our first anniversary, but also the unveiling of our newest initiative. The John Monroe Reconnection Program had moved from concept to reality with remarkable speed. We had partnered with family counseling services, legal aid organizations, and immigration advocates to create resources for separated families. Already, we had helped reunite 3 families divided by incarceration, immigration issues, and estrangement. Margaret Whitmore was known for many things, I continued. Her business acumen, her demanding standards, her complicated relationships. I saw my aunt shift uncomfortably in her seat. Uncle Robert studied his program with sudden interest. But legacies aren't static. They evolve through the choices made by those who come after. Today, I'm proud to announce that the Foundation's impact has exceeded our most ambitious projections. In our first year, we've provided educational support to over 2,000 students and professional development for more than 500 teachers across the state. Applause rippled through the audience. I caught Ellie's eye in the front row, and she gave me an encouraging nod. None of this would be possible without the inheritance Margaret left behind. Not just financial resources, but the challenge to transform what was given into something meaningful. After the ceremony, guests mingled in the former ballroom, now an airy, multi-purpose space flooded with afternoon light. I circulated among them, accepting congratulations, discussing future initiatives, connecting donors with program directors. Sarah approached, elegant in a simple black dress, her confidence more evident with each passing month of success at her gallery. "That was a lovely speech," she said, sipping champagne. "Very diplomatic." I smiled. "I've had practice." "Yes, starting with that eulogy." She glanced around at the transformed space. "It's strange to be here and not feel small, not be waiting for criticism or judgment." "That was her gift to us, in a way," I said. "The chance to remake these spaces, physical and emotional, into something healthier." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Derek's coming home next month. Did he tell you? He's finished his degree, landed a job with an environmental engineering firm." "He mentioned it. I'm happy for him." "He's changed," Sarah said. "We all have, I suppose." As the event wound down, I found myself in the garden with Uncle Robert, an encounter I hadn't planned but didn't avoid. Our relationship remained complicated, civil but distant. He had eventually accepted my decision about the inheritance, even joined the Foundation's board, but the old tensions lingered beneath the surface. "The center's doing well," he acknowledged, hands in his pockets as we walked the stone path between blooming roses. "You've managed the resources effectively." From Uncle Robert, this qualified praise was significant. "Thank you," I said simply. He cleared his throat. "I've been meaning to ask you something about Margaret." I tensed slightly. "Yes? Did she ever mention regrets near the end?" The question surprised me. I thought of the scrapbook, the letter about my father, the complex woman who had manipulated us all in life and death. "Yes," I answered carefully. "She had regrets." He nodded, looking relieved somehow. "She called me, a week before. She died. Asked me to come see her. I was busy with a merger, told her I'd visit the following weekend." He swallowed hard. "She was gone by then." I touched his arm lightly. "I'm sorry. I've wondered what she wanted to say, if it was important." "Perhaps," I suggested gently. "She just wanted to see you. Sometimes that's enough." As evening fell, the last guests departed, leaving me alone in what had once been Margaret's domain and was now something else entirely. Not quite mine, but a space I had helped reshape. I walked through the quiet rooms, turning off lights, straightening chairs, feeling the weight and the freedom of what I had inherited. In the study, I paused before the framed photo I had discovered that first day. Margaret and my grandfather laughing on the boat. Beside it, now stood a new frame holding a picture of my father from one of his letters, his smile so like mine it was startling. On the bookshelf rested Margaret's scrapbook, preserved as a complicated testament to who she had been. Next to it, A newer album documented the Foundation's first year. Students engaged in projects, teachers collaborating, spaces transformed from symbols of exclusivity to centers of inclusion. As I prepared to leave, Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway. After a year of working together to reinvent the mansion, our relationship had evolved from formal politeness to genuine respect. "The celebration was wonderful," she said. "You should be proud." "It's been a good year," I agreed. "Challenging, but good." She nodded, then hesitated. "There's something I've wanted to ask you. That day at the funeral, when you spoke about Margaret, did you mean any of it? Or was it all invention?" I considered the question carefully, thinking of all I had learned about my grandmother in the year since her death, the cruelty and the regret, the manipulation and the longing, the woman who had separated me from my father and yet kept every scrap of news about my life. "I meant none of it then," I said finally, "but some of it has become true since. Not because she was better than I thought, but because understanding someone fully means seeing both their darkness and their light." Mrs. Chen smiled slightly. "A wise perspective." "Not wise," I corrected, "just hard-won." Later that night, in my apartment, still modest, still mine despite the wealth I had access to, I sat on my small balcony looking at the city lights. The air held the first hint of winter's chill, a reminder that seasons change, that nothing remains static. On my lap lay the last of my father's letters, read and reread until I had memorized parts of it. "I hope you've become the strong, compassionate woman I always believed you would be." Had I? The question haunted me sometimes. Was I truly forging my own path, or still reacting to Margaret's influence, positive or negative? Was the Foundation my vision, or a response to hers? Was my life my own, or still defined by the complicated legacy I had inherited? Perhaps the answer was both. Perhaps that was what it meant to be human, to be shaped by the past while still creating the future, to inherit traits and tendencies and choices and then to decide what to do with them. Margaret had left me everything she valued: her money, her property, her carefully constructed image. But the true inheritance had been the opportunity to choose what to keep and what to transform, what to honor and what to let go. I had chosen to keep her determination, her strategic thinking, her belief in education's power. I had transformed her exclusivity into inclusion, her judgment into support, her manipulation into transparency. The Foundation would continue to grow, to evolve, perhaps in ways Margaret never imagined or would have approved. The John Monroe Reconnection Program would help heal families like mine that had been broken by pride, fear, or misguided intentions. The mansion would remain a place of learning and community rather than isolation and judgment. And I would continue my own journey, teaching, leading the Foundation, building relationships with the family members who were willing, creating a life that honored the past without being imprisoned by it. The price of forgiveness, I had learned, wasn't forgetting or excusing. It was understanding deeply enough to move forward with clarity, to use even painful truths as building materials for something better. As autumn deepened toward winter, I felt a sense of completion. Not an ending, but a milestone on a continuing journey. Margaret's final test had been fulfilled, though not in the way she had imagined. I had forgiven her, not because she deserved it, but because I deserved to be free of the weight of resentment. And in that freedom, I had found the most valuable inheritance of all, the capacity to transform what had been given into what could be. The true power of legacy, it turned out, lay not with the one who left it, but with those who received it, and chose, consciously and carefully, what to build with it.